Tonight is the sixth lecture of the series, which is called Bone in Each Other's Throats, State of Israel and Jewish Religion. Always a wonderful topic, 1952 to 1956. Let's see how much has remained the same and how much has been different over here. I start by invoking the past a little bit, which is a shocking thing to do in a history series, isn't it? The years 52 to 56, 1956, saw the crystallization of the unique religious reality of the modern state of Israel. I repeat, the unique religious reality of modern Israel, which is unlike any diaspora situation in the past. Let me explain. Before 1800, let me just backtrack a little bit. Before 1800, approximately, the traditionalist consensus, and I've spoken about this before, prevailed throughout the diaspora. Wherever Jews were, they was organized around these four items that I've mentioned in the past. I'm sure you recall them, right? This has to do with religious doctrine. This has to do with keeping laws and mitzvahs. This has to do with the fact that Jews everywhere never were citizens of their countries, but rather were recognized by the state in which they lived as being members of something else called the Jewish community of that, which was a legal corporation. That's who you paid your taxes to, and that's whose laws you had to obey or they could punish you. And finally, cultural insularity, which is always a football that we're wrestling with today, but that was a hallmark of the Jewish communities of yesteryear. Now, in the 1800s, over the course of a century, the consensus cracked. Okay, and we've talked about that again in the past. I don't want to repeat myself ad nauseum, but between all the the urbanization and the Industrial Revolution and the rise of historicism and the modern philosophy and everything we associate with the modern world, for many Jews, most I don't know, but many Jews, they no longer found this tenable or this or this or this. Actually, the state itself destroyed the autonomous coercive communities, and I don't think anybody even wants them. In Baltimore, Maryland, you're in the United States of America. You say like this: I'll be Jewish as a member of a shul that can leave or not leave. I don't want to be a member of a coercive community, right? And although once upon a time was a pillar of what being Jewish was about, the fact that it's strange to so many shows how far we've changed and how far things have moved. Cultural insularity is people are fighting about in Judaism till today. But in the European states of the 1800s, 1900s, you had to go to public school, you had to get a secular education, and even in America, you have to get a secular education if you go to day school, as you know. So those were out to lunch, but fundamentalism was a big fight, and the bottom line, as you and I know so sadly, no new consensus emerged, right? That's the dominant, overarching reality of Jewish life for the last 200 years, no consensus, right? That's just the way it goes. Instead, some stayed religious, as they call it, some still adhered, fundamentalism, and others did not. Movements and trends in the 1800s undertake to reimagine Judaism, or reinvent it if you prefer. But this took two separate forms, and from reaction to them, if I can use that term, it also took two separate forms. And bear with me, because all this has a lot to do with the state of Israel. In the first half of the 1800s, of the 19th century, the changes at that time, which were in Germany, were religious in nature, because the German society at that time was very staunchly religious and Christian. Therefore, the Jews are going to try to reimagine or reinvent Judaism, those who do, in a religious mode. And I'm talking about Reform Judaism and Conservative Judaism, both of which are invented in the first half of the 1800s in Germany. It spreads elsewhere. So everyone at that time conceives of Judaism as a religion. These trends that I just described will take place in Central Europe and in Western Europe and in the USA, but they will not take place in the first half of the 1800s in Eastern Europe. That's very important what I just said. So this is happening outside of Eastern Europe. So the different types of Judaism are going to be different denominations, religious denominations of Judaism. So you'll have Reformed Judaism, you'll have Conservative Judaism. And in those days, if you talked about a secular Jew, and pay close attention to what I'm saying, if you had a secular Jew, you simply mean a Jew who doesn't practice Judaism at all. They may be halakhically Jewish and they haven't converted, but that's it, right? As so many we know today. They are Jewish, but their Judaism is entirely one which is bereft of religion, but not that they were creating a different type of Judaism. Now, in the second half of the 19th century, European intellectual culture sharply secularizes. I need only mention, well, I don't know, Charles Darwin, for example, or somebody like that, right? Karl Marx, to show you that these are the hugely influential thinkers at that time, and European culture in general, went decisively and sharply in a secular direction. And at the same time, in the second half of the 1800s, Eastern European Jewry starts to modernize. Notice the modern world suddenly came to Poland, to Russia, to places like that. And by this time, if it's the 1870s, 1880s, all the rest of it, Reform and conservative religion have no appeal, because no religion has an appeal. No normal person, if you're a follower, for example, of Freud or Marx or Darwin or anything like that, is interested in any kind of religion whatsoever, okay? And so consequently, notice there's secular Judaism, secular Jew A, and secular Jew B. What do I mean? I'll tell you. He says, one is what I just said before. The person has no Jewish content in their life whatsoever. The second is very intensely Jewish. He wants to redefine Judaism as a secular phenomenon. Well, that's called modern Jewish culture, okay? Which means that, yes, there is such a thing called Judaism. No, it's not a religion. Oh, I know it was always viewed as a religion, but that was a mistake, right? There are reasons for that. And instead, just consider, I'll just give you one example, so you shouldn't all look at me weird. Consider a secular Zionist. He's strongly Jewish. He has a very strong idea of what Judaism should be. It's not religious, that's all. So it's a strong Judaism, but it's a culture, and it's something different than religion. This is brand new and never hit before the 19th century. And so what formerly was an oxymoron, because secular Judaism, I thought Judaism was a religion, how can you have secular? No longer was after the middle of the 1800s. So the poster boy for this, let's go to the next one, Hanam. I mean, that's what he was all about, is redefining Judaism as not a religion, as something different. He's very eloquent in writing about this way. And so, as I said before, you're going to now find, let's go to the next chart, right? I mean, he's Jewish, he's a secular Jew, he's a secular Jew. What's the difference? Both of them are atheists, so what's the difference? Both of them are atheists. What's the difference? The answer is, he's very intensely Jewish in his Jewish culture, and he is not. Agreed? No, they're both Jewish. Let me put it this way. They're as halakhically Jewish as you and I. Right? They're halakhically Jewish as you and I. But what a difference, you see? And all this is completely irrelevant, isn't it? This is the modern world, okay? The reason, like I say, I'm going somewhere with this. In Europe, attempts to create a viable secular Jewishness are interesting, but anemic and episodic, as I've described in the past. I mean, let's put it this way. Have you ever heard of this guy? No. Do you care who he is? No. He was a big deal once upon a time in the formation of Yiddishism and modern secular Zionist culture. I'm saying, once it had a flash, like a rocket, went somewhere, and then it died. We all know this today, right? So it was episodic. It was there, and then it wasn't there anymore. These were attempts to create a different type of Judaism. Imagine in America, there similarly are even today, believe it or not, or maybe not anymore, attempts in this country, among the Jewish community of America, which is large, to create a Judaism which has no religious content whatsoever, but nevertheless very cultural and very secular. This is associated, for example, with the universities and things like this, where it's very intensely Jewish, but it doesn't go anywhere, right? It hasn't had a kiyum, as they say. And so that's a key feature of the modern Jewish experience. There's one exception to what I'm talking about, and that, of course, is Zionism. That's a Judaism, if you want to call it, meaning it's not a religion, it's a secular phenomenon. It defines Judaism as something important. People even give their lives for it, but it's not religious, okay? Herzl was, of course, the political Zionism, just to get a state. Achad Ha'am is the redefinition of Jewish and the creation of a secular Jewish culture. And between there you have, because they created a yeshuv and then an actual state, this particular form of secular Judaism did not die out. It's the only one. The thing is, by definition, the secular Jews in the yeshuv, pre-state Israel, are not going to reinvent religious Judaism. They're post-religious. True? The Jews in Israel weren't interested in creating another reformed Judaism or something like that. Their Judaism was a secular one, a strongly felt but completely atheistical religion. They're convinced that a new form of Judaism will evolve in Israel. It will be Judaism, but will not be a religion. That's all these people you see about were like that. All of them are atheists. Some are socialists even. They're very intensely Jewish, let's face it. Their whole life is Ivrit. True. I mean, they're struggling to put together a state of Israel and help the Jewish people and all that sort of thing. But on the question of religion, religion is not part of their worldview. Okay. Now, thanks to the Gucci Aliyah, as I always call it, meaning from before 48, when the Sechnut and the British controlled all there, the secular Jews were able to stock Palestine with quote-unquote the right type of Jews, the way you stock a fish tank. You couldn't get in if you were too religious, except with small numbers. There was what you call a party, a schlitzel. It was all, the mafteach, it was all based on which group you affiliate with, and the socialist, the Mapai and Maham got the biggest number of certificates, and this group got this number of certificates, physically speaking. And I can tell you right now, the Hasidim and all, they got this much certificates, and it's stocking a fish tank. You can smile or not smile, but that's the way it goes. It wasn't an actual reflection of the world Jewish population. It was a eugenically, deliberately contrived way of creating the right sort of population in Israel, but that only works until 48. Because once you have a state of Israel, you can't do that anymore. And that radically changed the reality. As I told you before, the same thing out with the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. Remember that? Prior to 48, the overwhelming number of certificates go to Ashkenazim. So therefore, you can't say Israel once upon a time was like this. It was stocked like a fish tank. But anyway, after 48, it's not so simple. Now, to recap, the first experience of modernity was in Central and Western Europe, where the redefinition was religious, conservative reform as we call it today. The second experience of modernity was in Eastern Europe, where the redefinition of Jewish was not religious, but was post-religious, particularly like cultural Zionism and socialism and things like that. In the first case, meaning when the redefinition of Jewish was religious, the frum view that emerged, the verge of the religious, was, as the most dynamic, was that of a principled shredding of communal ties and replacing it with a different model. And that's, of course, exactly what these are famous for. Right? They said it's a new day, forget the idea we're all in one community, forget the idea all Jews are in the same boat, maybe halachically are and all the rest of it. When it comes to religion, you guys are illegitimate. The delegitimation of other forms of religious Judaism, Reform, conservative, and so forth, became a key principle in what we call now modern orthodoxy, right? The term orthodox, which now the historians use to replace the word traditional. One of the basic definitions of being a religious Jew, Hirsch will argue, and Chassam Sofer and people like that, is that there's only one kind of Judaism, and anybody else who tries to make a different sort of religion is doing the biggest crime and should be most strongly criticized and boycotted and this and that and the other. Not physical, but everything short of that. Now, mind you, they are not talking about the guy who has his store open on Shabbos. They're not talking about the person who doesn't keep kosher. They're not talking about the person who in their personal life is not so observant and maybe quite radically non-observant. They're talking about the person who says, Judaism says you should be Mechal Shabbos. In other words, they're talking about the person who tries to redefine the term Jewish religion. As long as you say that the Jewish religion advocates fundamentalism, nominalism, and all the rest of it, fine. We've always had in Jewish history, and we always will have, the right-wingers, the left-winger, the middle, those who are very observant, those who are not observant. What do we say on Yom Kippur? That we invite, quote-unquote, the sinners into shul. Which means what? The people who in the old days acknowledged that what they're doing is sin, but no, each one of us, none of us is perfect, and that they're very comfortable, these people and like them are very comfortable relating to. So they're not talking about the average, they're talking about the person who reinvents Jewish religion, okay? This is very important. In the latter case, however, those who were in the second half of the 19th century and weren't redefining Judaism as a religious phenomenon, but rather were redefining Judaism as a secular phenomenon. So basically, what's the attitude over there? If there was a Jewish religion, then the Orthodox would be right. There's no God. That's all, There's nothing to talk about. If there was, I agree, it's a beautiful thing. But it isn't. You follow? In that case, since they're conceding that the religious definition of Judaism is the Orthodox one, you didn't have this kind of attitude of we have to sever all of our bonds with the others. Where Hirsch was coming from, for example, and others, let me give you a good example I'm talking about. He had a fight in Baltimore about the JCC, where they should open the Shabbos. Oh my God, if you talk to Samson Raphael Hirsch, he says, what are you doing in the first place with one JCC? The Frum community should dig in their pockets no matter what it costs, and 50 years ago should have created a second JCC, which you run according to their principles and all the rest of it, because we don't recognize the JCC of the main community. The main community is not legitimate, et cetera, et cetera. You see? That's who he was. By the way, he put his money where his mouth is, and his followers did that. The Yekis, they put the money with the mouth and they build a whole separate parallel institutions. It's 2 Sinai hospitals, it's 2 JCCs, it's 2 this and 2 that. That's what it is. By contrast, when you go to Eastern Europe, and there wasn't a rise of a reformed type of Judaism. There's just a post-religious Judaism, if you can follow. It's a secular one, so then you had a different reality. You had the 2 Kovner Rovs, for Rabbi Yitzchak Spector and the Dvar Avram. You've heard of, some of you have heard of anyway. The Kovner community had, like I said before, you had the right-wingers, you had the left-wingers, you had the people who are super from, you had the Mechal Shabbos, and Gila Rai Shvichadam Avodah Zarah, the whole thing. The people only come on Yom Kippur, maybe, and so forth. So what? You understand? But all of them say like this: as far as the religious matters go, I go to these guys when I ever need it. Not that I ever need it, but when I ever need it. And if you're talking about what the Jewish religion is, talk to them. Personally, I don't buy into the whole idea of religion. It's because I'm a follower of Karl Marx, or I'm a follower of Charles Darwin, or something like that, right? But if there wasn't, it's a funny thing, but the fact that it wasn't expressed in religious terms, plus the fact that they were in Tsarist Russia under such tremendous anti-Semitic pressure, both of these dynamics militated that the Jews should develop idea that the community, remember we talked about the autonomous cores of community as one of the 4 pillars I showed you on the board, the notion of community, which is a very powerful notion within Judaism, should remain there, and we should just fight each other, that's all. You don't get divorced over it. You don't have this 2 JCCs, or you have 1 JCC, and you fight over whether to keep the Shabbos. You have one hospital, and you fight whether it should be kosher food or not. You understand? You have 1 cemetery, and you fight over this because that's what you do with your family. You understand? You stay in there and you fight. That was the sovereign attitude that prevailed in Eastern Europe, okay? And it did not lead to the religious seceding from the general community. These are very important dynamics I'm sharing over here. What is the proper Haredi position on secession? This, my friends, was the big fight in the Agudas Yisrael when it was founded 100 years ago. Back in 1912, when they had the first Agudah meeting in Agudas Yisrael in Katowice, over there. He was the leader of the Yekis, as you know, Chaim Brisker, leader of the Yeshiva world, the Litvaks. Breuer wanted to make it that the Agudah stands for the principle that no one's allowed to be in a community in which there are other Jews who are reform or conservative or secular or anything like that. And Chaim Brisker said, no, we don't agree. I don't agree to that. So it's the opposite of what you think. You know, you only think, oh, look how religious he looks. And this guy had a PhD. They said, no, it's which is true. But it's not like that. Because he is the voice of Eastern Europe. And he's the voice of Western Europe. He is the son-in-law and the successor of Samson Raphael Hirsch. And he comes from a different reality. Now, you don't need me to tell you that both these people were great, so they were very frum and all the rest of it. They saw it different. Okay? They saw it different. And these 2 dynamics are very powerful in there. So, if you go to the pre-World War II Eastern European community, Kehilla, Poland, Lithuania, Russia, those kind of things, Latvia, it's one big, happy, quarreling family. That's how it was. That was the culture. And religious matters were left to the Orthodox rabbinate, although more and more drift away from observance. So like I said before, who should run the shul? Of course the community should pay for the shul. The community should also pay for a secular high school, which will teach anti-religion. They can also pay for a shul that will teach, a high school that will teach religion, have to. You see? If you get married, it's got to be done by the rabbi, you know what I mean? You want to get a get, go by the rabbi. If you don't like what they do, get a civil divorce. That's how it went. You see? When it comes to getting dying and burial, the religious are the ones handle that. When it comes to allocating money for youth activities or for political activities, that we give 95% to the non-religious and 5% to religious. This sort of horse trading went on throughout the Kehillas in Poland, Warsaw, Lublin, Krakow, Lemberg, Lithuania, Kovno, Vilna. This is how Jewish life was. In every little community in these areas, there was an Aguda type party, there was a Mizrahi type party, there was a Socialist Zionist party, there was a Socialist Zionist A and a Socialist Zionist B. Then you had it really is true. There was A and B. Then there was what they call General Zionist A and a General Zionist B. I kid you not. And then there's the Jabotinsky party and the this and that and the other. And you say like this: how can a community of 1,000 people have 25 parties? Have you ever been in a show? What's the question? You understand? Now, why am I going through all this? It is this model that got transferred into Eretz Yisrael. because the Zionists, by and large, came from Eastern Europe, and they brought the mores of Eastern Europe with them. You see? And the whole idea over there was, you have the religious, you have the not-religious, and they'll fight it out, and so on and so forth, and after all, the not-religious, especially in the Gucci Aliyah, totally outnumbered the religious, so big deal. And like I said before, if it's a question of burial or marriage, let them handle it. And all the real important stuff, we will handle. And this is the culture. So what I'm trying to get across tonight and the future is culture. That's the dominant thing that runs everything, even though you think it's theology or it's philosophy or it's this, that, and the other. You don't realize every one of us is a prisoner of our own culture. Certain things we can stand and certain things we can't stand. It's got nothing to do with its objective reality. So this is now developed in Eastern Europe, and it was the basis for the status quo agreement that Ben-Gurion signed in 1948. Because what was that all about? We've talked about it in the past. When Israel was becoming a state, late 47, with the UN and all that, they wanted the Aguda on board. Obviously they wanted the Mizrahi on board. But they were on board anyway. And they said like this, there'll be a new state of Israel. Shabbat will be Saturday. Right? Why not? Right? And what else? The government will pay for maintaining synagogues and things like this. They'll pay for other things too, you see? And marriage and divorce will be religious, in the hands of the Rabbanut. And all these sorts of concessions were actually simply putting on paper what had been the general reality in Eastern Europe for a long time before that, okay? For a long time before that. Now, ironically, because of the Turkish legal tradition, the rabbinate ended up with more power and control over the people's lives than they ever had in Eastern Europe because of the absence of civil marriage and civil divorce. You see, in Poland and Lithuania, these countries, at one time or another, they ended up getting civil marriage and civil divorce. After all, consider Poland being a Catholic country, right? And although it is true, I believe Ireland only recently got divorced. Isn't that true? Ireland being all super Catholic, I believe there was no divorce there. So they must have gone to England or something. But no, seriously, but Poland, the Eastern European countries did develop these strong state institutions, and consequently, if somebody in Poland had, I'll just give you one example I'm talking about. Suppose, I'm sure this happened. He says, two guys, a man and woman fell in love in Poland in 1930. He's a Kohen, she's a Grusha, she's a divorcee. The rabbi will marry him, so go to justice of the peace. In Israel, it used to be ruled by the Ottoman Turks up to 1918. You will not be surprised to hear they didn't have such a thing called civil marriage, civil divorce. Everything's religious. It was a religious Muslim state, and the way they dealt with it was all the marriages will be handled by the Muslim authorities, for the Christians they'll be handled by the Christian clergy, and for the Jews they'll be handled by the Jewish clergy. So the British simply took this and kept it on the books. And when Ben-Gurion became the prime minister in 48, they kept it on the books. So the fact is, you have in Israel the control of the marriage and divorce by the rabbinate on the one hand, the Orthodox rabbinate I might say, and then on the other hand, you have the absence of civil marriage and civil divorce. There's always been a pressure cooker in Israel for a long time. They're fighting it as we speak, but they've been fighting it for decades. Who knows what's going to happen? Anyway, the bottom line is I'm telling you I don't know the future, but I'm telling you what happened in the past. Furthermore, when Israel becomes a state, there's a big difference of opinion between the Mapai and the Mapam. Okay? Here's Ben-Gurion was leader of Mapai. Here's Meir Yari. Maybe you heard of him, maybe you didn't. Most of you haven't heard of him. He was the leader of Mapam. Mapam, militantly anti-religious. They picked up that's part of their ideology. You understand? In other words, they were Zionist and Marxist equally, in equal measure, and they're very proud. De Gaulle, they're very proud of the fact that they are super opposed to what they call clericalism, and they don't want the rabbin to have anything whatsoever, and they figure any kid, boy or girl, is being put in a religious school, their mind is being poisoned. Instead, they should be exposed only to Mapam education. That's the only proper one. And so they lived in their own world also. In the governments, the way it worked was they never got enough votes. In the first election, it was Mapai 45, Mapam 19. And second election, it was like Mapai 45 also. And the Mapam is something like 16. Or notice they were nowhere near, and then they were mid-parek, then and the Mapam broke into different groups. So, but they're the bear, the boogeyman, you understand? The religious are afraid of them. And Ben-Gurion says, I guess, he says, see, I'm not like that, right? I'm atheist, but I'm okay. The Mapai party didn't have a tradition of a militant anti-religion. They're just not religious, you see? And consequently, you should consider yourself lucky I'm there, which they did. The religious parties fear the Mapam, and so for whatever they support the Mapai. It's not, as a result, unlike the situation with the Sephardim, the Ashkenazi Datim and Charedim never really had much trouble from the government, other than the Partei Shlish, as I said before. In other words, they didn't draft, Ashkenazi religious kids. If they didn't want to, they didn't go and try to close down their schools. They didn't persecute the Ashkenazi, or really cut their payas or anything like that. None of that ever happened. The only difference is that there definitely was in Israel a segregated employment policy. You had to be a member of the right group. And if you're not a member of the Mapai and you're religious and so forth, it'd be hard to get a job unless you can persuade them you're voting. Actually, somebody was here last week, I forget who, in my speech last week, he came over afterwards and he tells me that his father, back in 48, fought in the war and so on and so forth, was a frum guy, and he ended up being in the army. I'm just telling you what he told me. In the army, and it was an officer and so forth, but he always had to vote Mapai. I said, why do you vote Mapai? He said, because they know everybody is going to vote there. If there's one vote that's not for Mapai, they're going to vote for him, and he'll lose his job. So that's kind of atmosphere. But I understand, but there's a life besides election day. That's all I'm saying, okay? And when the Aguda made a deal with Ben Gurion and all the rest of it, they got things out of it, and they weren't persecuted per se. The Sephardic religious Olim, on the other hand, is a different story, as I described to you. Here, the Mapai plays hardball. Here, they're afraid lest the Sephardic masses vote for the Mizrahi or for the Aguda, God forbid. Mapai naturally is desperate to do whatever it takes to keep the Sephardic masses from not voting for Mapai, okay? And so they're afraid of what I talked about a couple weeks ago, that somebody might create a Shas party, back in the 50s or thereabouts, or vote for Begin or the wrong way. And so that's where they cut the payas, and they forced the parents not to send them to religious schools, and they tried to get them in mixed groups. And then, all the horror stories, which did happen, and this was done under the Mapai regime, but it had more to do with the fear of a huge electorate turning them out of office than questions about religion per se. The Mapai is okay if it's 10-20% in the religious parties in Knesset, as long as it doesn't get past that, out of hand. And the religious parties together always had 18 at the maximum. So what's that? That's 15%. Because there's 120 in the Knesset, so 18 is 15%, correct? 50% is definitely doable. It's not like there's any threat to take over Israel or anything like that. And accordingly, as I said before, the Mapai always played hardball in the Klita process, and when the Sephardic immigrants came off the ship or wherever they came from, and assigned them to these Mabarot. And if you're religious and you don't play ball with them, you won't get an apartment. And they did all that sort of thing. They also played hardball in the chinuch process. Well, as I said before, if you're somebody from the Sephardim and if you want to send your kids to a chinuch atzmai school or something like that, you will lose your job, or you won't get a promotion, or you won't get the apartment, and they can make it tough on you. And the battles over education, which I'll talk about in a second, are a very major element of the years 52, 56, and the 50s in general. There may be some people here in the audience, I don't know or not, remember the old days, maybe they're active in the Pe'ilim, right? And the Pe'ilim was the yeshiva send out these guys to try to be mechazek, the Sephardim, to try to get him a job, even though he's not playing ball with the Mapai and all the rest of it. It was that kind of environment, no question about it. And yet, it is precisely in this period, in 1953, ironically, that the education minister of Israel, who was an ex-yeshiva guy, but the Shano Pirish, as they say, but he turned against religion, Ben Sion Dinur, got his famous law passed, which hurts the socialist education and helps the Haredim, even though that's not what he planned to do. Let me explain out loud for a second. I don't know if you know this, but Israel today has 3 public school systems operating at the same time, side by side. Right? Meaning they're free. 3 public school systems operating side by side. One is a mamlachti, one's mamlachti dati, and one's chinuch atzmai. Mamlachti means a regular secular public school where they'll teach you the Bible is a fairy tale. Straight up, it's a good secular education. The ones that are good, the ones that aren't. But that's what the mamlachti school is, and they're all over Israel. Then they've got another one called mamlachti dati. It's a parallel system for the Mizrahi. Those religious Zionism. They got kindergarten, they got high school, and the only difference is there they'll tell you the Bible is from God and things like that. But they'll have a secular education alongside the religious education. And as you know today, it takes from kindergarten through Bar Ilan University. You see, but university costs money. Israel historically up to the 8th grade was free. I hear that recently that the high school is free. Maybe it's not, but whatever. The thing is, but that's the general idea. And then there's a third. So if you're a parent, you always have the option for free. This is not Baltimore. I know tuition is never a problem in our community, but in other places, I'm told it is. He said these two, you can send your kid, to the 8th grade here, whatever, for free. The third option, which is free, is you can go with the Haredi system, which go Chinuch Atzmi and things like that. Which means if you wish to, you can send your daughter to Beis Yaakov, and it should be free, okay? Because it's supposed to be sponsored by the government. You can send your kid to a Chinuch Atzmi school, which is a Haredi school, which will be a very little secular studies, if any. It's almost all Limudei Kodesh, as you know. That's what the parents want, and the government pays for it. It's free. Where did that come from? The answer, my friends, is it came from our period of 50 to 56, specifically with the 1953 law called the Dinur Law, Benzin Dinur Law. What happened was, if you remember from last year, I'm relying on your memory, remember last year Israel had a problem with the communists and the extreme socialists. Ben Gurion didn't like that. And remember I showed you last year the kibbutzim used to have the red flag and Stalin's picture everywhere and all that kind of stuff, and they did. So a lot of people, ani mamin b'emunah shleim b'Stalin. I mean, this was a key element. This you can laugh all you want, but it wasn't funny. Okay, I mean you can laugh. And that was the Communist Party and also the Mapam. Was it Mapam? Plus there were some others like that also. It was in that environment, okay, it was that environment that the consensus formed in the Mapai Party and in the general Zionist parties, even Begin, that there should be no such thing as the current system, where they used to have 4, not 3. What's the 4? They had the religious, they had the super religious, they had the secular. No, they had 2 secular. How do they have 2 secular parallel public schools? The instruments, one is non-socialist, the other one's socialist. You get it? There was a socialist public school system, K through 12, and again, certainly up to the 8th grade is free, and then afterwards you have to do whatever you do. And this is, wait a second, and this is, this was for decades, this is from the 20s, and the kibbutzim, for example, and also in Tel Aviv and places like that, they had schools that belonged to this zerem, as they call it, to this particular stream. And I'll say it again, here all the teachers and everybody were trained in Mapai and Mapam teacher schools, and they want to advocate chalutziyut, and they try to get the kids as much, like in the frum schools, they want the kids to go to yeshiva. In those days, they want the kids to go and be avodah chaklait. They want to go and work in a kibbutz and a moshav, and many did. Just to give you one example off the top of my head, Shimon Peres was in one of these schools, and he was in the city, in Tel Aviv, but because of, all the propaganda from the teachers, he went and he joined the kibbutz, a small one in the Galilee up there near the Kinneret in the 40s, and this was not atypical at all. As I said, under the politics at that time, Ben Gurion particularly came to the point, and Benzin Dinur, and they said, this is wrong. It shouldn't be that you fly the red flag, and it shouldn't be you have Stalin's picture, but you should have Chaim Weitz's picture up there or something like that. And so the result is that they were able to pass a law which said that they're merging the 2 streams. So there's going to be one secular school system, and each one will have equal representation, but the fact of the matter is it killed the socialist system. That's what happened, okay? Lamaisa, what happened was it killed the socialist system. Within 2-3 years, there was a lot of fights over it. There were kibbutzim that broke up over this issue, and it's a whole little parsha over there I don't have time to go into. But by the time the smoke settled, the dust settled, the fact is that the Chiloni system had one particular school. So that means there's one less of them in terms of funding, but they didn't insist that there should be one religious school. You understand? They didn't insist that the Mizrahi and the Aguda join because that didn't have a chance of a snowball or whatever. So the result is that they're willing to put up, and that wasn't even their main target. The main target was the socialist system. But so it hurt the number one stream of education, which was militantly anti-religious. Consider all the Mapam schools that I just described before, which were strongly anti-religious, not just non-religious. And they're all killed by this. And second of all, the second thing that happens is that they recognized, after a lot of negotiations back and forth, that the Haredi system, the Chinuch Atzmai as we call it today, independent education, should be awarded not full government funding, but a lot of government funding. So they got their full recognition as a separate stream. So what this guy ended up doing was shooting the secular in the foot, because they provided the basis, financially and otherwise, for the rise of a religious and even a very religious school system affecting, since between then and today, I bet you 1 million kids. So it's not what they had in mind, but it's what happened. History is wonderful that way. In the years 52, 56, in the early 50s, the chinuch battle becomes a hallmark of the Israeli reality and remains so. And that's why you read in the paper, I'll just use two words, and you'll all immediately nod your heads. Yair Lapid. What's that all about? They want to defund this, and and too many religious schools, and so it's still going there. The Mizrahi, the religious Zionist movement, like the Catholic Church, competes across the board with the seculars. They have K through 12, including high school. You have co-ed high schools. You have separate high schools, as well as college. They start Bar Ilan in 1950, and by 56, it's really something, okay? And what's the idea? The seculars have the Hebrew University. We want to have a Dati University, okay? Somebody should be able to go around and not feel bad he's wearing a yarmulke or hear the teachers in school make fun of the religion. But that's a certain way of competing by as I said, like the Catholics, making Notre Dame, making Fordham, making Georgetown. You make a parallel set of institutions. At the same time, in the Mizrahi world, in the religious Zionist world, particularly in the years 52, 56, is the beginning of the move among the young, some of the best and brightest, to the religious right. All right, it starts at that time. The founding of KBY, for example, in 1953, the Keren B'Yavneh Yeshiva. Very interesting. This means that for the first time, and I'll explain in a second, the religious Zionist movement said like this. He said, we need a yeshiva that'll be on the Ramah, on the level of the Aguda yeshivas. Israel Goldwick, who was chosen to be, the Mizrach went and begged him. He said, please, we need somebody of stature, be the Rosh Yeshiva, and start here in Keren B'Yavneh. It didn't happen overnight. At the beginning, it was like a high school, but within a decade, I'd say, within 10, 15 years, it turned into the yeshiva that you're familiar with today. He was a Talmud of the Chazon Ish of the Brisker Rov. That's who he is. And by the way, he wasn't sure, should he take the job or not? Because he was a black hatter, still a black hatter. And here the Mizrahi saying, we want you to come and take over here. Chazon Ish said, do it. The Brisker said, don't do it. He did it. That's what happened. That's what happened. And by the way, he was their main figure for 40 years, I think, or something like that, until he passed away not that long ago. He's a great Talmud Chacham, all the rest of it. He never was in favor of the Hesder. It's funny. The Rosh Yeshiva of the main yeshiva, who you think of KBY, that's the Hesder yeshiva. He always said that this: Anachnu lo yeshiva Hesder, Anachnu yeshiva im Hesder. You understand? In other words, it's a yeshiva, and they also have this other program, which means that the religious Zionist movement, in choosing him and building this up, was making a statement in terms of moving to the right. Okay? Although, not in terms of a black hat and all that. See, culture. You see? We want it to be with the kippah sruga and all the rest of it, but they want, that should be serious learning, as the expression goes. They do this by the 50s to compete with the brain drain to the Haredi yeshivas, because by that time the Panovich Rav had already set up Panovich, and schools like Panovich are attracting the kids from the Mizrahi high schools, and they don't like that. The Haredi high school teachers in the Mizrahi schools are influencing the kids to go to Haredi yeshivas. Here, as you know, Roshach, for a short time, he taught in one of the Mizrahi high school for a meal, until the Chazon Ish said, get out of there and go somewhere else. But if people like Roshach were doing it, you can imagine for each person like him who got yanked out and put somewhere else, there were 100, there were 200, 300 of people from Mir and from Kletsk and from this and that and the other. They came, like happened in the United States of America, correct? Where, no matter what the high school is, but the Rebbe is a real black hatter, as they say over here, and so it could be that it's a religious Zionist high school, but what's he telling the boys? He says, but you wouldn't with the real learning, you have to go for a year or two to a real place, go to Hebron, go to Panovich or something like that. And therefore the movements, I guess, we have to set up KBY, we have to Mecca, we have to compete, you see? So this kind of dynamic is really interesting. Originally, before the war, the big shots in the Mizrahi movement were opposed to yeshivas, as they correctly feared that it would lead the movement to the right, which is not really where they wanted to be. The leadership of the Mizrahi movement historically, what they call in America, centrist orthodox. You get it? Don't fadrei me a cup about the covering the hair and the this and the, just be religious, just be Shomer Shabbos and keep kosher and all, don't do mishugasin, right? And that's really and they were always afraid, and correctly so, the yeshiva was lead. That's the reason why somebody like Rav Zevin, if you've heard of him, one of the great geniuses of the 20th century, and he was the biggest gun, in my opinion, in the Mizrahi movement. He made the Segabi Talmudid and all these other, it was a huge genius. Never could get a job in yeshiva because the Mizrahi didn't have any yeshivas. Rav Zevin came in 1934, I think, and he used to teach in the Mizrahi Teacher Seminary in Jerusalem. It's what's called Zaken Ve'ein Lefi Chavodo, meaning there was no position that was matim for somebody like him in the time that he was there. And now in the 50s, they're trying to change that through the creation of new institutions. It's just a very interesting process. But already in 1939, the head of the Bnei Akiva said at that time, we're losing kids to other movements when they grow up, meaning they're going to the left. You can say we don't want yeshivas to be too frumak and all the rest of it, but Rav Neria, already in the late 30s, said the kids get to a certain point and they join the Mapai or the Mapam or those youth movements or whatever, they join the kibbutz, we're losing them, and consequently, he already said in 1939, we need to have a yeshiva of some kind. That's why he started Kfar HaRoeh. But that really didn't turn into any kind of a strong yeshiva. It was more like a high school, and what they call the Tichon system, where they set up what we call in America yeshiva high schools, which is, partially there. But like I say, then any kid who's good in the learning says, and what comes after this? You see, so they wanted to create something. It's a whole long process. Obviously, I can't do justice to it, but I think I'm giving you the basic idea. By the early 50s, they perceived that they need a higher standard yeshiva with which to compete and create a new kippah sruga Talmid Chacham reality. Right? What's the difference if a guy wears a kippah sruga or wears a black hat? Culture is everything. And so therefore, they moved to Merkaz Rav Kook. And by the way, Merkaz Rav Kook starts to become a serious place in the 50s also. In general, it's the oldest line in market economics. Competition has a powerful reality, doesn't it? Okay? When you have the competition out there, both sides have to scramble to keep up with the Joneses. On the other hand, it's also true that they were founding as I said before, the Bar Ilan University. Dr. Chorgan, if anybody's old enough to remember, ran YU, the Hebrew program in YU for decades. Dr. Pinchas Chorgan, and he was what you would call a centrist, Mizrachist, and he's the one who came to Israel and made the Bar Ilan University. And there was a time in the 30s and 40s he controlled all the teacher appointments across the United States in the religious schools. You see, Rabbi Dr. Pinchas Chorgan, and from that world. So which is it? The religious Zionist movement, therefore, is showing right and to the left. Right? They're creating new realities to the right and to the left. Because Bar Ilan is going to be a university, that's going to move things to the left. You see, everything has to do with power struggles, and if you create a university and all the professors and the historians and the others think they know more than the rabbi, they're going to try to dominate the culture. If you have a yeshiva, then they don't have any time for that. They want the rabbis to dominate the culture. And so the Mizrahi movement will be faced in the second half of the 20th century with the fights that go on even today over, who's the top position and who controls. As far as the other set of religious communities in Israel, the Haredim, as we call them today, is concerned, the years of 1952 to 56 were years of dramatic consolidation, crystallization of institutions and sociological trends that would play out under every expert's radar screen over the next half century as we know today. All of a sudden they say, whoa, there's 1 million Hasidim, there's 1 million Haredim, and there's schools all over the place, and they're taking over the country. This has been happening, my friends, since the 50s, but since we're very slow, so nobody ever paid attention. You look at the sociology books written in the 60s and 70s, they hardly ever mention these things. Just as in the United States of America, if you look at the federations, the associates, all the rest of it, they never mention these things, and then they wake up one day and they say a third of the Jews in Baltimore are Orthodox, 3/4 of the kids, high school kids in New York are Orthodox, Hasidic, whatever, the Pew Report and all the rest of it. Then all of a sudden they say, whoa, where did this all come from? In the case of Israel, it's a very interesting story, obviously. You're dealing with the Lithuanian yeshivas, because that's what I'm talking about. The 50s is the era of the consolidation of what we call the Litvish yeshivas. The yeshivas, of course, Lithuanian yeshivas is a phenomenon. There have been yeshivas throughout Jewish history, but there's a very specific type called the Lithuanian yeshiva, which arose in the 1800s and the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the Slobodka yeshiva, I'm sure you've heard of that. There's the Slobodka yeshiva moved to Palestine in the 1920s. Okay, 1925. This is the altar of Slobodka Moshe Mordechai Epstein. They picked that up and they called it the Hebron Yeshiva, right? Because they moved to Hebron, right? Now, why did they move to Hebron? Why don't you move to Jerusalem? Fascinating story. It's a culture clash. The Litvish Yeshiva in the 1920s was in its European fashion plate heyday versus Mea Shearim. Okay? I'm sure you've seen the pictures, but I'm going to show you a few. I'm showing the pictures of the fact that this has to do with the altar of Slobodka. This has to do with the fact that in Europe, before the First World War around that time, the there was a culture of contempt for people who were learning yeshivas. They said, why don't you join the revolutionary movements or become a bourgeois? Or this? What are you sitting time, wasting your time and learning? And one of the reactions to this in Lithuania, especially in Telz and Slobodka, was they wanted to, everybody should look very dignified and look very bourgeois and have a cane and dress right and all the rest of the show. See, we're quote unquote normal. And so the heyday of this was the 20s and the 30s. And here come guys dressed like this into Mea Shearim, okay? I don't know if you can see over here, this guy over here, this is great, this is Chevron. These are guys in Chevron. This guy has a 3-colored shirt. Imagine it's today thing, with a white thing and a 2-tone shoes, and one of those straw hats. I mean, he is Mr. the Dapper Dan, he's looking to get into a fashion contest. Can you imagine somebody walking in yeshiva like that now? Okay? Now, this is the point. Look at this. Look at these guys over here. This one has a beard because he's older and married. Nobody here has a beard. This guy doesn't even have a yarmulke. He's got a big head of hair. Maybe you've heard him. His name is Hutner. You understand? Okay? This one. Now, mind you, let me balance out the equation. Each of these guys can wipe the floor with anybody else in learning. That's the one. So they come to Yerushalayim in the 1920s, and it's cognitive dissonance. They don't know, the Mea Shearim doesn't know what to make of this. Because to them, a key part of being a religious Jew is you dress the dress, you look the look, and all the rest of it. And here come these guys. They have the hair is crazy, the coat is crazy. In their Israel, I tell a famous story that Rabbi Ruderman went to visit, who was dressed like this, went to visit the Chavetz Chaim, and the Chavetz Chaim said, get rid of that red tie. You understand? Meaning, it has to do with, I told you before, culture. Does that have to do with the fact this one knows how to learn that? They all know how to learn, but boy, this was the elite. Okay? When Slobodka and these places, the elite of the learning world, but they looked funny. And therefore, very early on, Moshe Mordechai Epstein, the Slobodka, we're not staying in Mea Shearim, in Yerushalayim, because they're going to throw stones at us. They started already, and they put a pen, they put the, what do you call them, the Pashkevil and all the wall. And so they moved to Hebron, okay, for a couple of years until the Arabs killed them. But wait a second. I'm just trying to show you how this starts, okay? But these are the real dandies. Look at the negative. Here's the altar of Slobodka at the beach in Tel Aviv. Okay? To somebody from Mea Shearim, it doesn't, what are you even going within 100 miles of Tel Aviv for? It's like one of the last places at the beach, and so forth. And, now, by the way, he's not in a bathing suit or anything like that, right? Fully clothed. But the very fact that somebody goes there to get, and I'll tell you again, it's called, you know why? In Yerushalayim, in the Yeshiva Yashan, going to the beach is, totally unheard of. In Lithuania, everybody, including the yeshiva world, goes to Palangin, as they used to call it. They used to go to Atlantic City or whatever it was over there. In the Bein Hazmanim, as they call it, in the summer when it was hot. It's a culture, right? It's a culture thing. Now, that's why it's so interesting. But I can just tell you, this caused a cognitive dissonance with the next group. This is what you're supposed to look like in the 1920s. That's what a frum Jew is supposed to look like. These people look like Goyim, right? But it doesn't make sense. If they were not religious Jews, no. But this guy knows the Ketzos by heart, and this one knows the Raja, and if you start, talking to them and learning, they can destroy you. And so it caused a, what shall I say, a radical short circuit in the culture. Okay. I told you it's going to be interesting tonight. Now, after the riots, you all know that the Arabs go into rioting and they kill a lot of people in the Hebron Yeshiva and all of the Jews. So the Hebron Yeshiva has to go back, no choice, to Geula, right? Where, meanwhile, the Lomsher Yeshiva had moved from Poland. It's another Lithuanian Yeshiva to Palestine at that time, to Petach Tikva. Here's some of the poor. These are the ones who survived. By the way, he's all got a full head of hair. But, there's all the terrible pictures. I don't want to share that with you. But, the Arabs were vicious in the rise of 1929 is what it is. And there you have it. Now, the dress and the, externals go with a certain culture. Prior to 48, a school like Hebron, which is in Yerushalayim, and the Lithuanians that are there, now Lithuania, they carry the ethos, the cultural ethos of the Lithuanian yeshiva, which is pure Litvish alumnus, right? In other words, who you are is not defined by the externals, but is defined despite the externals. You get it? To be frum is looked down upon if you're talking about externals. This has to do with the Muster movement. It's a long discussion, but it's very interesting. The old expression in Lithuania is "from is a galach, id dav zayin erlach." You understand? Which means that from pious, that we expect from a Catholic priest. We expect for you to be honest. You see, to have integrity. And that's not something you wear with the tzitzis outside, and that's not something you wear with a black bekasha or something like that, but that's who you are. So it's a certain way of doing it. I want to remind you, this is the golden age of the Musar movement in these yeshivas. And so the Bachur's individual proclivities are his private business up to a certain point. So if you were we treat the student in yeshiva like an adult. And you have your own privacy, you have this, and that. It's an honor system. We expect, and what you do, as long as you put in let's put it this way, you put in your 18 hours of day of learning. So what you do in the rest of the time is like your business. You can laugh, but I don't mean it to be funny, right? And look, you had communist sympathizers there. You could have people there in Hebron Yeshiva, in the 30s and the 40s. I'll show you in a minute. You had people who all are in learning, and they have a VODs, and they can talk in learning, and this and that and the other. But this guy supports the Irgun, and this one's for the Haganah, this one's, like I say, sympathize with the Communist Party, because after all, they're going to redistribute the wealth, and and that's the only way to bring social justice in the world. And you ask me a question, how can a guy like that give a chabura, and the thing, you can. The world is there. Let's take a look at the next picture. This guy is a communist. I'll tell you right now. Now, I know he is. Here you have everybody in the straw hats. So it's weird. The Meir Sharm doesn't know what to do with it. Okay? So this is part of the reality that's there for the 20s and the 30s. The Rosh Hashiva there was Cheskel Sarna, after Moshe Mordechai Epstein died, was a very famous person, and he really pushed this ethos until his death in 1969, which is you have to treat the people as they've been in Lithuania. You have to treat them like adults. You understand? And give them all the respect that goes along with that. And therefore, you had very much a policy of a certain don't ask, don't tell, what people have with their private hashkavas on the side. Here you have, for example, Rav Herzog, who sent both of his sons to the Chevron Yeshiva in the 30s. Now, I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about the 30s. Sent them both in the 30s. One is Yaakov and one is Esav. You understand? In other words, this one turned out to be not religious. This one ended up being religious. Yaakov Herzog became Ben Gurion's personal secretary, if you remember. I spoke about it in this. One of Israel's foremost diplomats, but 100% of Shomer Shabbos, a big Talmud Chacham. He had smicha from Mr. Zalman Meltzer. He has a Pirush on Zeroim and all these sorts of things. And this one, who was a general, he became an officer. He wasn't really religious. When he was home, he didn't smoke and that sort of thing. But that's what it was. And both went to the same yeshiva. But like I told you before, one goes this way and one goes this way. And this was not at all atypical in the 30s and the 40s. This is the culture I'm trying to get across over here. There were no black hats in those days, literally. If you take a look at all the pictures, it's the golden era of my youth is all gray hats. Remember that sort of thing. And anyway, that's one piece of the pie, because this will go on, come important, more and more important as the 40s and the 50s and the 60s go by. The Chevron Yeshiva is still there, going strong till today. However, there's a second dynamic occurring in Palestine, not identical with the Slobodka tells a mere dynamic, and here I'm referring to the phenomenon of the Chazon Ish. Okay? Here, let's take a look at this for a second. Here you have a rare case where you have a video of the Chazon Ish. I think this is the only one from shortly before his death. He's going to a bar mitzvah, I think, or something like that. That's him. In Bnei Brak. It's around 1950, 51. It's not the greatest camera, but I don't think they had a fantastic video camera at that time. There he is, and so forth. Now, that's enough. Now, here in the Chazon Ish, as far as the point I want to get across is like this. He didn't approve of Dapper Dan. You understand? The Chazon Ish advocated a selective appropriation of Hasidic culture, particularly in the externals. You see? He said, I'm not a Chassid, I don't go to a Rebbe, but they're right with the black hat, they're right with the Bekasha, they're right with growing a beard, all these other things that the Lithuanian yeshivas are doing, I don't totally approve of them. Notice I don't approve of them. And, he wasn't violent or anything, chas v'shalom, but nevertheless, the whole cultural stance he projects is one in which these things are not really true to Frum Judaism. Okay? They may be explained by what was going on in Lithuania in the 1920s or something like that, but it's not really, and it shouldn't be in Eretz Yisrael. You see? So he wants to move everything like in this kind of direction. to use simple words from a gray hat to a black hat. Okay? Now, the idea of rejecting European fashion gets a lot of traction in the wake of the Shoah. I mean, who are you trying to impress? And whose culture are you trying to copy? France, England, Germany? You know what these countries are. You know, they're all behemoths. Look what they did to the 6 million Jews. This is a culture? It's not a culture. So who are you trying to kiss up to? Who are you trying to imitate? You can see that Bachrim, that young people would say, yeah, you know, he's right about that. You can hear it. There's a move to the right as far as Beis Yaakov movements that are set up now from now on are concerned. There's much less Samson Raphael Hirschism and much more Chazonishism. That's the story of the transfer of Beis Yaakov movement from Europe to Israel. When it was in Europe in time of Sarah Schneer, for example, 95% of curriculum was Hirsch. Okay? And when it comes to Israel, they do away with that pretty quickly. Okay? And it becomes something, as I say, to use, again, an expression that would be easier for you to understand, comes more yeshivish. There's certainly a lot less of the ethos of Yavne. That doesn't survive in Israel at all. Yavne, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, was the Beis Yaakov movement in Lithuania. They didn't call it Beis Yaakov. They called it Yavne. That's why Telz has the high school, you know, the seminary Yavne. They still keep it up. They haven't dropped the name. But if you went back to Lithuania and Latvia in the 1920s and the 30s, you'd find, under the influence of this man, Rabbi Karlbach, who later was the chief rabbi of Hamburg, very famous, Yosef Karlbach. He went in the First World War, and afterwards, this kind of picture you're not going to find in the Beis Yaakov movement anymore, because he's a teacher surrounded by all the girls. But nevertheless, they set up gymnasium and high schools on a high level, and this is where the Rosh Hashiva's daughters went in the 1920s and 30s for the war, and they prided themselves on having an excellent Limudei Kodesh program, but also an excellent Limudei Chol program, with equal emphasis on both. There's articles on this, and that's, you know, the Chazon Ish is not interested in that at all, and that does not transfer over to Eretz Yisrael, because that's, again, whose culture you're trying to impress or copy. What's the point? We need more Yiddishkeit, as the expression would go. There's certainly a move to the right under the influence of Chazon Ish in terms of Chumras. Here's the iconic picture of the three participants in the famous battles over the shiurim. How big is the matzah? How big is the becher to use at the Seder play? And all that sort of things. The Chazon Ish says, Avram Chaim Noah, who, by the way, it's funny, I mean, he was from Meir Sharim. So he is advocating the old measurements, which are smaller, because he said, this is what this is what my Bubby did, this is what my Zadie did, my great-grandparents did, and we've all lived in Meir Sharim, place like that, you know, for centuries. And the Chazon Ish is representing the new look, which is let's re-examine the sugya and see what we come up with, and you know, your measurements are not large enough, and so for which become the new ethos in there. By the way, the Chazon Ish's brother-in-law, the famous Stapler Gaon, is a big participant in these back and forth. It gets pretty dirty. You know, if you read the literature back and forth, then they call each other names and so forth. It's plagiarism. It's all kind of things, because you're talking about huge cultural changes. Even though to the outsider who's not part of this world, they would have no idea. They say, oh, who cares how big the becher is? But you're making big cultural statements over there, and he did. And Chazon Ish is not a fighter. It's not who he was, but he said, this is my opinion, and I'm just putting it out there on print. But I can tell you, by the time you get to the years 52, 56, this is sweeping the yeshiva world, as they call it, in Eretz Yisrael, which is going to be a profound effect, you know, elsewhere as well. On the other hand, I do want to point out that the Chazon Ish and that whole movement has a very pragmatic, as opposed to a dogmatic, attitude toward Medinat Yisrael. There's all the difference in the world. Now, both of these men were ultra also. But look at the difference in the world as far as the Medinat Yisrael goes. The Satmar Rebbe leaves Palestine and won't go there precisely because the very existence of a state of Israel is the work of the devil. I mean that literally, the Sitra Achra. It's just the most horrible thing in the world. And the Chazon Ish said like this, it's terrible, it's this, that, and another, yes it is, and now let's see what we can build here. You see, so it's very interesting that, you know, in some things they're very machmer, and other things differently. It's the 50s see a remarkable bunch of opinions. This is all intensified by the arrival in Israel in the 40s of the Panovich Rav. Okay? The legendary Rabbi Kahaneman, I think he's the next one, is that right? Yeah. Who was the rabbi in Panovich in Lithuania, and built a whole empire there. Then was all killed by the Germans. And as everybody knows, he came to Israel with nothing. He was in depression, clinical depression, for about a year and a half, 2 years, and then he got himself out of it and he started rebuilding in the middle of the war. Okay, in the middle of the war. It's quite amazing. Panovich actually represents a new model in many ways. He was the rabbi from 1920 in Panovich, who was one of the very important communities in Lithuania. I can tell you right now, I'll show you pictures later, Panovich was a left-wing community, derech klal, meaning by that time, the Haskalah, the socialism, the Zionism, and all the rest of it, very strongly entrenched in Panovich. So he was going against the trend, particularly, he was in the Aguda. He was one of the big machers in the Aguda. And the community was overwhelmingly, like I say, the Bundists, the Yiddishists, the Socialist Zionists, these all these different types of groups, the General Zionists, the Jabotinsky, and so on and so on. Very little of the Aguda in there. So he knows that in the regular politics that we talk about, the big happy fighting family, you're not going to get any kind of serious funding for what he'd like to happen. So he said, I guess I don't need to go there. I'll hit the road, and I go to other Jewish communities, and I raise the money on my own. He discovers a great principle of the 20th century, which is, if you get the money, you don't have to care what anybody else says. Right? You put your own $1 million together, and you can tell everybody else where to go. It's interesting. And so he gets into America, then I'm sure he went to South Africa, where he struck it rich, and then he went to Argentina, all the places where there are Lithuanian Jews. You see? And there he's able to, as a writer, but to play on the heartstrings of the traditionalism, which he did very successfully. His message is very simple. You may not be a Shomer Shabbat, but you want that there should be something like this in the world. And, oh my God, he's legendary. And I would say the 50s, the late 40s and the 50s were the heroic era of the Panovich Rav, when he went around the world and raised a ton of money. Went from Los Angeles to Cape Town to Singapore to I don't know where. But it's quite amazing. And that way, in his own city in Panovich, he can say, you do whatever you want. I'm raising the money from Chutz La'aretz, so to speak, and I can build whatever I want. That's how he built a large yeshiva, an entire K through 12, what we would call today a TA and a Beis Yaakov, and all the rest of it. He purchased in Panovich, the city of Panovich, what we would call today, the Northwest High School. Is that a big piece of territory with the big buildings and all the rest of it? He had a Polish gymnasium, and there's a huge sort of thing. A lady named Mrs. Nathan Fagan from Philadelphia gave him $35,000 in 1928, I think it was. And I saw the contract or something, and it said like this: they're going to use this to build a whole thing in Panovich. When one day we make Aliyah, because they're already thinking at that time, we're going to sell this building, we're going to move to Israel, we're going to build the building over there, and still we're going to call it Mrs. Nathan Fagan Building. Okay, so I just want you to know that the name will be there. So anyway, this is what it is. Although, like I said, he's a pillar of the Aguda, but he doesn't want to run for the Knesset. That's famous. They asked him. He was the most experienced parliamentarian in the Aguda party because he had been in the Lithuanian parliament back in Lithuania in the 1920s. It's interesting. In the 1920s, the Mizrahi and the Aguda joined together in a common political party called Achva against the non-religious. And he was one of the big machers and that sort of thing. So he had an unusual career, but he doesn't want to be identified with a party over here. You see, because that's counter to what he wants to build the yeshiva. You follow? There's a famous joke they tell. I know it might be true, it might not be true, but it doesn't matter. They asked him, he said, why don't you want to run in the Knesset in 1949? He says, I'm not a millionaire. They said, it's got nothing to do with, you get a salary. He said, you don't understand. The halacha is every time you hear blasphemy, you have to tear your clothes. You understand? Every minute in the Knesset, they're going to, So, he starts the yeshiva in December of 43. He was sick in bed, and he told Shmuel Rozovsky, he said, you take 10 guys, go into this hut, and start and just start. That's what I started even by the mid-50s, the yeshiva expanded to about 150. Tell me, it's not the Panovich of today at all, but it's on the way. Okay, 150, 175 students. He's willing to take people from around the world. And you see the beginnings, especially in the years 52, 56, of a pattern of steady growth. Slow but steady growth, right? It doesn't transform overnight, but it's always going up. You understand? The Panovich Rav, he always said like this: the Chazon Ish is my guide. When the Chavetz Chaim was alive, I followed him, whatever he said, and I followed the Chazon Ish. That means he's not going to be interested in Dapper Dan. He's not going to be interested in two-tone shoes and white this and all the rest. And the whole ethos of the Chevron didn't appeal to him. He wants a yeshiva and he got one, yeshiva, where there's a shiur, not just people don't go, and where there's what you call in Tzai Sanud, where obedience, the yeshiva gives rules, and the boys obey. There's a very strong staff, and everything is run with a discipline. On the other hand, he will provide. He'll work his head off, which he did do, to make sure that they have the wherewithal to make it happen. So, as I say before, I found online, you can find anything now, I have a small piece to show you, which I'll show you in a second. Let me just give you by way of introduction. This is obviously from I can tell you it's before 1951. I'll tell you why in a second. So it's from 4950 or 51, and they're building the first of his set of institutions, which are called orphanages, the Batei Avot, right? When he took a lot of the kids from the Shoah, okay, which was a tough thing to do. I'll just tell you one example. These kids would get off and they put them in yeshiva. First thing to do that night is steal all the food from the kitchen, because that's how you survived under Hitler. If you don't develop those kind of talents, you can't make it, right? And the cooks are complaining, and the Panovich said, let them alone. It'll take them a month or two till they see they don't have to. The food will be there anyway in the morning. But you have to go with where they are. So he was a very smart person in this regard. You understand? He set up for girls also, male orphans from the war, female orphans from the war, and he was very successful in this. And then after he set this all up, he'll end up building the big, huge yeshiva that we're familiar with today. If you've ever been in Bnei Brak, you have an idea what I'm talking about. And you'll see over here, he got some group from Brooklyn. I think it was Brooklyn. I don't know if it was a religious group at all, but that's not the point. They're helping war orphans. And they have the American ambassador, James Glover McDonald, Truman's ambassador, the first one to Israel, who was this is not common. He was somebody who was not Jewish at all, and he really liked Jews a lot, which is most unusual, right? Bissel Meshugada. Yeah, and he comes and gives the whole speech. It's just the video, not the audio, but you'll see the whole thing over there. And you'll see Chaim Moshe Shapiro, the head of the Mizrahi, the minister of the Interior, because this is not a miflagti. This is not a party thing. This is not about the Aguda. You're just building up Torah. The message he gets across. He's pretty successful at it. Here, let's see the segment that we have. See, what they vote Goodwill Welfare League in Brooklyn from Mrs. Mickey Levin. And here's from Los Angeles. This is, I think, Rav Herzog or Rav Unterman. I can't, yeah. That's the head of the Mizrahi, Chaim Shapiro. That's Ambassador McDonald. There's a Panovich Rav with Ambassador McDonald. I'm sure they had a lot to talk about. And here he is with the lady in charge of the Brooklyn operation, and she's going to lead all the orphans in a march. It's all being filmed. He was great at putting these things together. Okay. And that's Rav Uziel, the chief rabbi. That's Rav Herzog, the Ashkenaz and the Sephardi chief rabbi over there. Everybody's going to speech. I think it's Rav Unterman, I believe. Predecessor of Ad Yosef. That's the head of the Mizrahi party, Chaim Moshe Shapiro. Yes. Reb McDonald. And so forth, and you do all these ceremonial things. Right, they don't tell how long the sleeves are. Naturally, President. By the way, Ambassador McDonald gave a speech. He said, President Truman considers this a significant day in world history. Okay, there's more in there, but that's I don't want to stand here for, it's actually a 35-minute business. Okay, so what's interesting, to see the Israel of old, if you want to do it, but we don't have that kind of time. The bottom line is that everything that you're seeing over here, and the empire is going to create a new sociological reality. All of a sudden, you're going to have a large Haredi world when it never existed before. But it's very slow over here. Bnei Brak, as I told you before, will be a very different community than Panovich in Lithuania, which these are all secular groups, as you see over here. These are non-religious and even anti-religious high school, Jewish, Ivrit and Yiddish, back over there. Here in Panovich now, the students will grow beards, they'll dress more and more Haredi, even as they develop the Litvish Yeshiva Lamdus and all the rest of it. Panovich will have a high level of the learning. There'll be more obedience. The mashgiach will be somebody with a powerful influence in everybody, all that sort of thing. These yeshivas, plus the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem, which moves there after the Holocaust, are all small, but they're not tiny in the years 52 to 56. But a number of specific Israeli factors favor their future growth and expansion. First of all, they're dynamic and charismatic in a world of stale traditionalism. By that time, the regular shuls and the regular Orthodox Judaism was passé and stale, and people don't really keep things. And the rabbis have to make in one concession after another, and it's compromises, and it ain't going anywhere. And the yeshiva, if you buy into it, is dynamic and it's growing and it's going to create a new world, and it calls for sacrifice on the part of the children. They're free from the draft. Okay, it was already in 50 and 51 that Shimon Peres, have you ever heard of him? Was the Mankal at that time, at the age of 28, 29. Under Ben Gurion, he was the number 2 in the Defense Department. It's incredible. He had this power, and he's the one that cut the deal that the yeshiva boys are free from the draft. This is Peres' family back in Lithuania with his religious grandfather. Shimon Peres is a great descendant of Chaim of Voloshin, the founder of the first Lithuanian yeshiva. So he's a direct descendant. So it's funny the way these things go. And after all, how many boys were we talking about at that time? It wasn't a large number, and there it went. So that's an important factor in there also. I would point out that Israel in 48 actually had what they call religious brigade, the Gedud Tuvia. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, over here. For a while during the siege of Jerusalem, when the Jordanians were right there, all the yeshivas had lotteries, and they chose. I mean, even the Satmar yeshiva in 48, the boys should do digging and things like this on the battlements against the Jordanians when things were tough. But they didn't want to. They viewed that as Yotzei Min HaKlal. They viewed it as exceptional circumstances. And when the war is over, they didn't want to do that anymore. And they, as I said, they were able to make a deal that they're free. So that's a big push to go into the yeshiva. Third, they're getting government funding, small at first, but formalized at the elementary level for boys, and even at the high school level when it comes to Beis Yaakov for girls, something that never happened in history. Here's Rabbi Levin, Yibit Shemar Levin, from the Aguda Yisrael party in the Knesset. He's the brother-in-law of the Ger Rebbe. What is the reason the Aguda is in the party? Why isn't the Ben Gurion's government? Because they're getting money for these institutions, which they realize is something that could never occur in Poland, it could never occur in Lithuania, it certainly can't occur in the United States with the separated church in Israel, but in Israel, under a non-religious, anti-religious government, anything is possible, as they say in Yiddish, that the good Lord wants it, even a broom can shoot. So that's what happens over there. The rise of the female Beis Yaakov teacher as a government employee makes possible the rise of Kollel, even though they didn't realize it. Because you marry somebody, if she's teaching in the growing and expansion system, you get a government salary, you get government benefits, the Kupat Cholim, and you get a pension, all the rest of it. All of a sudden, she's a mensch, he doesn't have to work. That's not what Ben Gurion necessarily had in mind, but that's what they set up over there. Fourth, the Israeli welfare state. Remember, how much was a loaf of bread? Yeah, nickel, okay? And how much was the milk? We all remember this, right? What? Yeah, dime. In other words, the government super subsidized the food and things like that. The rents were small. It's going to sound funny, but a Marxist social welfare state is kind of ideal for the Kollel. You see? Because of the price controls. You see? Fifth, the failure of the Israeli secular culture to fulfill its utopian promise with the rise of the state. I mean, does anybody know who any of these people are? They were big deals once upon a time. Yeah, this is A.B. Yoshua, this is Nathan Alterman, this is Hugo Bergerman. Exactly, nobody knows what I'm talking about, that's my point. All right, these are the big machers, these are the big machers of the Israeli culture, who in Israel got traction, but nothing outside of Israel. Israel didn't turn into this Athens, as the secular culturists had envisioned, like Hanaam said, that we'll produce our own Shakespeare's and our own Goethe's, and we'll have a thing that it's not just local, but it'll be international in scope, and it will wow the world with the Jewish genius, in a secular sense, the Jewish genius, and this will attract people to the power of Judaism, totally bereft from religion. You had a local culture. You had like every country in the world. The Portuguese have writers. There's nothing to write home about. You understand? And Bulgaria has writers and all sorts of things. It didn't become a wow thing. And so it's nothing really to attract anybody as something super amazing. And that's the way, the Israeli culture has evolved so far. And as a result, it's not that much of a competition with the Torah, let's put it that way. There's no institution in religious society that can compete with the yeshiva by this time, because the synagogues, the youth groups, all the rest of it are into compromises, the learning level is very low, the Shmirat Mitzvahs level is very low. It is what it is. And plus, to add one more piece to this is also the period when the Hasidim arrive in Israel. Because after 48, there's no more this party, Gucci Aliyah. Every Jew has a right on Chok HaShavut, no matter what he or she looks like, to come to Israel. And they do after the Shoah. The Rebbes, the big ones like the Belzer Rebbe and the Ger Rebbes, this is the old one, this is the one that comes after him, they come over there and they're very smart. They concentrate on corporatism and on avoiding fights with the non-religious. The old Belzer Rebbe, the old Ger Rebbes, and all the Ger even today, they say, don't go make protests, don't fight with anything. Get your institutions, build up the schools, build the yeshivas, build the Beis Yaakov, build the neighborhoods and all the rest of it, and let time take its course, you understand? Let demography, if you wish, take its course, which it has in 60 years, has it not? Okay, it's created an entire Hasidic world in Israel. Ben Gurion perceives the beginnings of this trend already in the early 50s. He could see that. And it's brought to his attention by the issue of drafting the girls. Because when they tried to issue a law to draft females along with men, so all the Haredim, all hell broke loose, and in New York they burned the flag, and Israel made hafganot, and he saw that this is something they really feel strongly about, and like, who is this group and what's going on over here? Ben Gurion wants, because he was a statesman, all the Jews in Israel, or as many as possible, to accept the state as legitimate. He wanted the Torah Karta to be marginalized, and he was successful in this. Okay? This has always been the policy of the Israeli government. You can't shoot them, so you have to marginalize them, make them that they're an extreme that nobody pays attention to. Ben Gurion perceives the game of the Chazon Ish and the others as to accept the state pragmatically, but not in principle. If you ask the Chazon Ish or the Haredim, is the state of Israel a legitimate state? No. Now that it's here, what are you supposed to do? We have to cooperate with it. But he bothered him that they didn't see the state of Israel, which is a secular entity, which is therefore a non-fundamentalist entity, doesn't believe in God and all the rest of it. He can't accept that, and that bothered Ben Gurion very much. He figured he could thrash things out with the Chazon Ish in conversation one-to-one, reach some kind of a contract. And so he went very famously in 52 to visit the Chazon Ish. It didn't work out. It's very famous. Chazon Ish didn't really want to get in the conversation in the first place. And then when it was, as it's famous, you can't believe half what you say because, once something happens, the room, they build it up in stories that comes one after the other. But there's a famous story that they tell, which is that he told Ben Gurion, you have an empty ship and we have a full ship, and when it's two ships are clashing, the ship that has nothing in it has to make room for the full ship. Which means that all of the secular Zionism and all of Israel is an empty ship, and the yeshivas are the full ship. Maybe he said that, maybe he didn't say it, but he certainly held that way, you see? And the bottom line is, he did not want that they should make some kind of a deal, and they didn't. Okay, very frustrating to Ben Gurion, but the Chazon Ish passed away the following year in 1953. Not long ago was his yahrzeit, but he stamped his stamp on the culture, pragmatic, but totally anti-Zionist in hashkafa, in outlook. Ben Gurion, for pragmatic reasons, already had given up on drafting the religious girls in order not to drive the Haredim into the Torah Karta. And so they passed a law which says everybody gets drafted, but in point of fact, if you were Ashkenazi, let's put it this way, if you really went to Beis Yaakov for high school, then they give you a patur. The Sephardic girls, and that's the one they give a hard time to, you understand? And others who want to get in there. There's, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, until Begin, this was always in the news and always making a big deal. But if you were some rabbi's daughter, or you, like I said before, if you went to Beis Yaakov's system and all the rest of it, then they say, okay, they're not going to do it, because the government couldn't afford to have that kind of huge clash over there, which will cause their very legitimacy of the state to be always in the news. Ben Gurion is totally aware that there's a possible demographic time bomb ticking in Israel. You can't shoot them. They won't disappear. He needs their votes. Meanwhile, they have no appeal to the greater population, certainly not to the greater Ashkenazi population. This is still the case in Israel, despite the small number of Baal Tshuvas, notwithstanding. I mean, we take in as many as we lose. That's the bottom line. They take in so many people become religious. There's so many religious people become non-religious. That's how it goes in Israel. In the long run, though, where is it going? The numbers are building up in favor of the Haredim. In conclusion, the years 52 and 56, in good old Eastern European style, you have two sets of Jews with diametrically opposed points of view, found themselves thrust together in a grand community of fate. because outside is the Arabs, and we kill them all. They're a community of fate. Stern necessity forced them to work out a modus vivendi, and as we see, the Haredim did not come out bad at all. Things is, whereas the seculars, by their own principles, were compelled to grant freedom of worship to the religious, because that's what part of secularism is, the religious are not bound by their principles to grant freedom from worship to the secular. Is that true or not? So what happens when there's a Haredi majority? Religion and state, instead of being partners, ended up finding each other a bone in each other's throat. But in the famous story in the Gemara, where is the Rabbi Yoshua who knows how to pull the bone out of the throat? That, as I say, lies in the future. Good night.